of Conversations on the Fringe.
Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Josh, and this is the Red Pill Project, Conversations on the Fringe. And we are here tonight talking to the Postmaster General here, Russell J. Gould. If you guys don't know Russell, he is the man who figured out grammar postal war and put an end to it. He took down their authorization to exist here and now and put forth a language that allows humans to communicate in facts on contract using mathematical certifiable construct. Maybe you've heard of the quantum banking system, including quantum grammar constructs. His newest documentary, Last Flag Standing. I almost said Last Man Standing. Last Flag Standing.
And Piercing Dynasty. I just came out with
Piercing
the new one.
And Piercing Dynasty. We're going to have a great conversation tonight. We're going to be talking about the formation of the United States of America. But not only that, is this facade of a system that was organized around it. This illusionary system that was created around it that has been hijacked by what we can consider this cabal or this evil in the world, and kind of how to navigate it, and how Russell has really done his research and figured out what this system was, how it operated, and then was there at very specific times in history to be that person to say, hey, look, there's something going on here. We need to intervene. And we're going to get into all of this. So, Russell, welcome to Conversations on the Fringe. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been waiting for this show for a while. We've been talking back and forth. So, glad to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Josh. It's an honor to be here on your show. I'm excited to answer any questions because I'm sure your audience and the audiences of the world, we need full closure amongst ourselves as a society and as a people so we can come to conclusions that benefit our lives. And governments are because we, the people, allow. And so it's about articulating that and having the necessary full closure. And I hope what your audience learns tonight is some of that full closure so they can make a determination which is best for their family, their loved ones, to safeguard their lives and to have a happy and fruitful life. So
absolutely. So, I was talking to you before is one thing that I like to do on this show is I like to lay a base foundation. And with you, because I've been studying you for kind of months, and I remember you from years ago, and I've studied you then, and I still don't know the blunt of what you have going on in the research that you've done because it's so intricate. So what I want to do is I want to lay a foundation for everybody. So maybe tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and then how this all came upon you.
Well, I'm someone that has always tried to keep a cheerful heart. And, we go through life and life's journeys and, we get our hearts broken, and I'm no different than anyone else, right? I've come through that, and hopefully I've learned about myself to be a better person through those heartbreaks. And as I did that, I had a concern for society, a concern for people, concern for myself. I love myself, and, I want to treat my fellow mankind in the same way that I would choose to be treated, right? With kindness, fairness. I have a sense of truth, and I'm always searching about life. To be a student of this life and constantly learn is just the most wonderful tool of all. So I started in the grammar, started getting into it in 1995. And, I started dabbling in the courts in 95, 96, and looking at the time, we were looking at the protocols of what they call the law of the flag, because the flag sets the venue. And I got into deep conversations. I had judges come off the bench and sit across the table from me, take off their robes. I had judges take off their robes, try to sit next to me and function as my master. I went through the judicial system. You got to remember, the general public doesn't know this, but the U.S. judicial system, they trained me, right? They ultimately trained me and gave me their deepest, darkest secrets. Number one, because I earned them. And that's one of the main things that I had a 3-judge panel in Wisconsin, and they had their robes off, and the judges were actually in tears. And they said, "You've earned this. We've never seen anybody stand on the law of the flag, because the flag sets the venue." And that's so important that people don't comprehend. When they fly these yellow fringe flags in the courtrooms, they're changing venues, right? When they're placing marks or writings on flags, that's a violation of the Patriot Acts in Title 36. And so we have to look at these flag protocols as something that's very important. Josh, I watched your earlier show on DEFCON 5 today, and one of the comments from one of your news reporters was that when they showed up to the state capitol, they couldn't carry a flag on. It's unfortunate that the people didn't have their flags and have the flag speech prepared to now direct, because who are they?
Right.
Who are they? And what flag are they under? Right. And so, unfortunately, Ashley's entourage is uneducated on the protocols on how to move their flag into that. I guess it was the Congress or wherever the steps were. I can't remember exactly what the news reporter said, but it was into one of those buildings. Those buildings are controlled by the Port Authority through the Department of Transportation, who gets its authorization from the post office. And your audience needs to really check out what's called ship's papers. Ship's papers are the credentials that we carry on us to get into these buildings. And that's why when you go to court or when you go to wherever they were, they're asking for their identification. And that comes under what the shipping containment, which I've studied under the birth certificate system. And I restructured that for the citizens on what we call a claim of the life system, which now gives the sovereignty back to the people to now direct and control these birth certificate entities that have invaded our sovereignty of our existence, right? Because that Congress building or wherever they were, that's the people's house, right? And so the people need to know how to go into their house. And so the flag sets that capacity to go into the house. So it's unfortunate that Miss Babbitt's entourage did not have those, just didn't know. And if you don't know, you don't know, right? So they're not in fault. They lack the credentialing on how to articulate to our public servants who work for the people, right? They work for us. We don't know how we don't know how to set the venue. So I really focused in 1995 through the year 2000 on the criteria of what a flag did to open up a venue. And a venue is a place where you negotiate contract, where you freight forward bills of the ladings, which are like file stamps on contract, postage stamps. You're moving your shipping containment, this war that they placed upon us through this birth certificate system. You're moving yourself as a freight forwarder, as a postmaster, and they didn't know. Ashley's people, they just didn't know. And so it's kind of painful for me to sit back and watch, because I'm just like, could have hammered them. Death is an actual thing.
Yeah.
And what happened to the murder on January 6th of that person who was in their house, but did not know how to go into their house, right? I don't agree with the approach there. And it was a setup for sure by the fumbling, bumbling idiots. You can, and I've had the fumbling, bumbling idiots set me up too and buy a bunch of platinum from me and raid my labs. I'm down the road with the fumbling, bumbling idiots, right? So I have a different communication and correspondence with them based upon sitting down with their grammar professors and that sort of thing. But, it's unfortunate that, she was, had a right as a grieving mother to go to the location of where the murder happened and have her grievances, because she lost something very precious to her. Yeah. And when you lose something very precious to her, it's part of that life's journey that I was talking about earlier. There's a real heart, there's an emptiness in your heart. And there's nothing you can do to fulfill it. And so she thought to go help for her healing. She's trying to internally heal herself. So for whatever reason, she made the choice to go there and take her flowers or whatever she was doing, right? And that was her sovereign choice. It's unfortunate that she did not have the people in the entourage. I don't know what it looks like, right? I'm just saying what I heard on your DEF CON 5 on the news reporter that was saying some of the things. So when I heard her say, "Oh, you can't take the flag in here," it's like, oh man, perfect timing, right? You could have hammered them. And so
spot on.
That's the venue for sure.
So, Russell, I want to actually talk about this. So I actually worked in Washington, D.C. I worked at the Washington Navy Yard when I was active duty military. Now, one thing I can tell everybody here, because I've been to various different military installations and federal territories, is what Russell said, that, so basically federal land. There's nothing in the United States Constitution that gives the authority for the federal government to actually own or acquire land. People need to understand this, okay? But when we start talking about federal land, on every federal parcel of land, there's always a post office. Number two is that they're all controlled by the Port Authority and the Department of Transportation, which fall under the post office. And he's absolutely right on this. I can tell you this because I worked with maintenance and facilities maintenance on each one of these installations I've ever been on, and this is who they are actually under.
Yes, Yeah, they actually and see, this is where they've tricked us with this birth certificate system, and we've made a presumption as society to go along with it, right?
Yeah.
And so what I did is I figured out how that mechanic worked, and then I got into the bank books and got to read about what Benjamin Franklin was doing, and I got to time the bankruptcy, right? And so as they came out of an international bankruptcy, I could position myself to take the flag and then go. Strange that you'd work for the Navy. I was working in 1996 through 2004. I was working with Navy JAG. They, once a month, talked to them on the phone, that sort of thing. I was teaching them about the quantum banking system that I'd created, because they had given me the suggestion to register the quantum system with the Department of Navy as a foreign vessel for martial law theaters. And so I learned a lot from Navy JAG just about the protocol of global movement of matter, right? And they were in turn, it was a fair and equitable change in trade to service, because they were asking me questions about structure of sentence structure, right? Which is the quantum grammar system of always maintaining your facts as facts in a now-space theater, right? So they had many questions, and I had many questions. It was a good experience that I had until they breached peace, and we had to go into the martial law theater. But the Navy is in charge of vessels as they move into foreign waters. And so as I set up the postal construct, they would actually follow me around the world, the Department of Navy, their computer programmers for their intelligence community, and watch and monitor, because they have the eye in the sky. So they could I monitor the meetings that I was in different banks and different corporate entities around the world. And they really, I kept a positive attitude. I wasn't there to bash anybody. I was there to put a corporate structure in place that we didn't have to comply with these nonsensical ideologies that I felt that they were, I'd been in the Tavistock Society, read some of their theology. I've been in the different, John Birch Society, read some of their stuff when I was a kid. So, you see this corporate meritocracy coming at us to invade into our private property, invade into our personal space, steal our rights, and basically make us slaves to a system that has been replaced on a global level. And so I did that, and it was very tedious. I wasn't accepted everywhere, because some countries were like, when I was at the United Nations, like China, the Chinese embassy kicked me out 3 times once they realized I had the quantum banking system. Because they kept the bank charters, of course, and then once they realized what was going on, they were the only country to place military guard around their flags. So when you go into the Chinese embassy in New York, they actually, under the law of the flag, they take it serious. They know what that means. Right. So they're posted up with machine guns with 2 guys around their flag 24/7, right? But you go into other embassies and there's no guard. It's a totally different scenario. So it's very interesting to watch the education on who's taking the law of the flag serious and who's not.
So explain to me then, because there's a lot of ways we can go with this, with setting a precedent. So it sounds though that at the very heart of all of this stuff, this system that was built up, and I actually talk about this a lot when I talk about this this conceptualization of a theory I built called optimization theory, is that man has created their own system of energy exchange. And this is the financial and the money systems. And this is kind of where we get all laws, regulations, codifications, all of these things that derive from that, is this system of energy exchange that mankind has actually created. And so when we're actually talking about here in the formulation of the United States of America, a free country, when the founders actually created it, that's up for debate with people. But when they created it, they created it in a certain specified way. Take me from the creation of this country, what your research has shown as the original way that they had set this up, what they wanted for the people, and then maybe how it got hijacked and what happened to it.
Okay, so I was able to get into the Benjamin Franklin bank books at the Philadelphia Benjamin Franklin post office in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And in doing so, I saw that Benjamin Franklin, prior to the United States concept in the colonies being formed, was a shipper and a setter of survey lines for commercial enterprises for other countries through Canada, Nova Scotia, and setting up the seafaring ways. Because at the time, the way of trade was done through moving vessels and cargoes on manifests. Mm-hmm. And so, and nothing has changed, right? Because you have your airline manifests, nothing. It's all the same protocol under the shipping containment that they put upon we the people. And in 1775, Benjamin Franklin borrowed 1.6 million francs with the memo to use that to finance and set up the Continental Congress and set up a theater because you have to set a venue. You just can't get buildings overnight. You just can't bring people in. It costs money to run communication lines back in those times. There's no internet, right? So you're having to pay for somebody to go out on a horse or something to that effect, to get the message out, to bring these delegates in. And so that took 1 year. Nothing becomes law for 1 year, this 3-day rescission, which would take you to July 4th, 1776. That would be the first day they could legally come under contract and write contract, not the subject matter, but they could enter into contract, right? Because the contract was the Bill of Rights and what they were setting up. And so Benjamin Franklin, now, did he tell? I have no forensic proof to say that he told other founding fathers that he had borrowed money. I just don't have. I did not have access to that communication, so I cannot say what the founding fathers knew or didn't know about that borrowing of the money on July 1st, 1775. Right. So and the armies were being set up and everything was set up in 1775, but the government didn't exist till 1776. Well, how can that be? Well, it was a corporate meritocracy that was slowly coming in, because if it should have been done the other way, the people should have set up that borrowing of the money if they needed to, or the people should have funded it. Instead, England or France came in, his 1.6 million francs, and lent him the money. And then it was a corporate meritocracy that moved its way in. Now, whether the other founding fathers knew, I have no full closure on that. But the foundation of where that came from, I did verify those facts. So that was a different position that most people haven't really went back to look at. And it's very difficult for them to do that because you have to order the post office to open up the glass mirrors. It's all encased in lock and key. So that's a whole nother. And because I'm Postmaster General, I just had my Postmaster General slip and gave it to them. And they called me back 4 hours later and said, "You're the Postmaster General, you can come in." So yeah, for me it was good, but for the general public, I don't know how their research would go on that, because I don't know if anybody's tried. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, yeah, and so it's interesting too, because the foundation of this country, as it was originally formed after the Articles of Confederation, we had the Articles of Confederation later, first, yes. And then we had the Constitution that came in. We had this this corporate meritocracy that actually was created. But it's interesting to see that money was the basically mechanism of movement. Is that there's always this aspect of movement derived from money, which is an intermediary of exchange of energy. And
yes.
So I find that interesting. And what I was actually talking to you before the show is that the East India Company was really big in the financing and the formation of the early United States, directly connected to Alexander Hamilton, with his uncle being one of the direct board members of the EIC. They were against the King of England because of high taxes, taxation without representation. They funded the early revolutionists in the United States, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. And we see their influence in early America. And we got to remember, who's the East India Company? They own the most ships. Yeah. Right? The most ships in the world during that time, one of the largest corporations, probably equivalent to $1 trillion corporation in today's world value by 1865, or actually, sorry, yeah, by 1865. And 1871 is interesting because they disappeared. 1871. There's an interesting date, though, of why did they disappear? And I think we got some theories on that. But East India Company, obviously, they're navigating through admiralty law and these likes of various other laws that pertain to the water, and beginning the implementation of those into the corporate structures of government. And I think that this was one of the plans of a lot of this global elite, was to At this point in time, you had government, which was monarchical, feudalistic, might have been, right? And then what you have is this corporate structure as well that is dominated by these governmental structures. And they sought to maybe merge those two, where you have this corporate structure that influences government. And from there, they can begin to manipulate it.
And once you see the overall construct of how, when they brought in this birth certificate in the 1900s, you can see how they numbered and really wrote the underwriting of the insurance policies and set up bundling on QSIT numbers and did all kinds of things where they made money and you were never allowed to be that money, even though you were the chattel, the person on that.
The surety bond, yeah.
The surety bond. It's a dangerous thing for them to still. That's why they can't really use that anymore. That's why the people have so much power right now. So that's why we see Congress not in session. That's why we see all these things, because it just doesn't exist. And that all came out of bankruptcy when the third and final bankruptcy got paid off in 1999. And they just went totally rogue. It's unfortunate that the people weren't ready. You know, in 1999, the education level was not there with general society. Right? They were more worried about Y2K.
Yeah.
They had everybody thinking that instead of what was really happening. And so they vacated all the guidelines for electing a president. And that was the 2000 election. And it was unfortunate the general public, they're looking at Florida Chads and they got everybody looking at the theater, but not comprehending what's really being taken away from the people, which was the sovereignty of choice, because now they slid the concept of voting for a leader, which they called the president, into a foreign vessel and dry dock called the United States Supreme Court, and then under what's called a writ of certiorari, which is a pronoun adverb verb that doesn't say anything, to get an opinion of what the people need. That's not a certification of a fact of what the people voted on. And so they did away with the guy. And then at that point, they really could get away with legally in their legal fiction, putting in all these voter scams and all the things that you're seeing out here right now. Congress is in on it, of course, right? And they're trying to pass as much laws for all this influx of migration that they have coming in to make sure that the people that are here that have a stake in caring about the lineage that they've had here on our lands, the love for the concept of freedom, the concept of travel, free speech, faith, all the things that the founding fathers put into place as a position for us to think that we were a part of, and we were a part of. They then implement, and you can see them crossing all the lines to steal everybody's position of rights. And everybody's still pointing at, oh, they're not electing a Speaker of the House. That's not the problem. The problem's not being articulated, because the problem happened in 1999, right? And then they got away with their rogue wars, right? Their genocide of 9/11, right? Against their own people, right? Shooting missiles into our own Pentagon, right? The whole thing's a psyop put on by the U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Department. We can thank them. They are a major influencer on how they present things to our society, right? And so the think tanks behind that are a dangerous thing, right? Very dangerous, because they're winning the hearts and souls and minds by influencing and waging war through deception and not addressing the problem, which was, hey, we actually need to come up with a system by the people to figure out who the leader of the people is going to be, which is a director, they call it a president, whatever word term you put on that. But we need to go back to 1999 as a society of citizens. We need to fix that, right? Because the Federal Elections Commission lost its authorization to exist as a corporation. I'm sorry. And when you run for a president of the United States, I syntexed all their forms from the Federal Election Commission in 2012. You have to sign in a box. And because of the laws of four cornering, anything in a box is not on the page. So if you're running for the position of a president or vice president, you have to fill out these forms, and everything is four cornered, which means there's nothing in there. So now they can come in with nothing in there, nobody running legally. They can put a psyop on the people and have all this voting where they have all these expectations, and they cheat like crazy because they can't be held accountable, because there's no terms to vote for the leader of who the people want to lead. So it's a very dangerous. The problems are not being looked at, which was what happened in 1999 and then the 2000 election of Bush and Gore. And what they really did then, the precedents that the case law that they're hiding behind, dropping everything under the FEMA Federal Emergency War Powers Acts of continuity of government when they lost authorization for FEMA to exist as a corporation. You know, a month ago, I sat down with the head of FEMA for the state of Washington and Homeland Security. He approached me. I was doing one of the things that I love to do, and he was watching me in the crowd. And he approached me right before the championship game, and he's like, "Hey," he goes, "I work for FEMA, I'm head of FEMA here for state of Washington." I said, "Oh," and I said, "Well, you got a real problem." He goes, "I do have a real problem." I says, "Your problem is your corporation doesn't have authorization to exist." I says, "And that's a real problem. And that's a real problem." He goes, "You know," he says, "I've watched Last Flag Standing." I told him I got a new film coming out, Piercing Dynasty. You should watch it. He goes, "I really like what you're saying." He says, "The people need to know more about this accountability and taking back control of this because it's out of control." I says, "Your hands are tied because you're financially in a position where you're accepting the finances for the federal government for the citizens of your venue in Washington. Mm-hmm. And they're saying that they want one thing, and the bankers are telling you that you can do another thing. And so you're in a tough position." I said, "My personal counsel to you is next time you're in negotiations, bring me to the table because I'm the number one guy that can articulate fairness for the people. And I will not compromise on the national security of the citizens of our land." And I've told the financiers of Elon Musk this, that I'm not going to chip the people. I don't agree with any of that, right? And they're all into the chipping and they think that's great and that's fine. But that doesn't happen on my watch. And I'm certainly not going to compromise the security of the people that I love, my friends out here that I hang out with. Right? I'm a normal guy like anyone else. I have people that I hang out with, I love. And I don't like to see what's happening in their day-to-day lives because they're being strapped to a system that went rogue. And nobody's addressing what happened in 1999 because that is the root.
So let's start there then. So why don't you explain to us what exactly happened in 1999 that has caused these things to happen? Because I don't know if my audience is probably up to date on this.
So in 1999, the federal government paid its debt in full to the financiers of who held the note at the time for the bankruptcy of 1929, when they slid into another 70-year moratorium of bankruptcy. And then they had many bankruptcies subsequently in different decades to confuse everybody, right? But if you maintain the rules of the contingents of evidence, in 1999, the federal government announced to the citizens of the country that, hey, wait a minute, you can no longer pay your taxes to the Internal Revenue Service. Why? Because the Internal Revenue Service has been kicked out of the United States as a collection arm because there's no debt. They then told all the citizens that to pay your taxes to the U.S. Treasury. So that was the first sign that a venue or a jurisdiction had changed. Then they had to vacate physically the estate of the Constitution and the guidelines for a Constitution, which were, we vote in a leader, which is our president, right? He's the leader of the concept of the corporate structure, the United States Inc., the United States of America, two separate entities. And that leader then oversees the business for the corporate structure. Well, because the Constitution, which was the guidelines for the bankruptcy, that when that vacated and ended, the United States Post Office found themselves in a crucial juxtaposition because you couldn't be in two places at once. And what I did is I took their flag away from them so they couldn't reset contract. Right? This is very important. Right? So they couldn't go out and say that now they're a corporate entity. So now they had to do everything they could to minimize who I was, right? Which was then the wars and the theaters that I had to go through to learn and hold my position with my flag, to then vacate the estate, which means they had to vacate the guidelines to elect a leader, which was the Constitution. So that was, if your audience looks up Title 39 Section 101, subsection A and subsection B, a post office in their own writing was supposed to have a constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And it vacated that constitution when they broke the continuance of evidence, which is these timelines of meritocracy that they've been following.
So that was
right?
Title 39. What was the rest of it?
Section 101, subsection A and subsection B. So the post office vacated its position for a constitution because the guidelines for the bankruptcy was the Constitution established in 1789. So what happens here is, as that estate gets left, they have to create a scenario to fool the people, which is the Florida Chads, right? And so they got everybody looking at them. So they have to unannounce a president. So there's nobody there in D.C., and then they try to come back in and reauthorize, but now they don't have a flag to reauthorize under. Mm-hmm. So they have to come under a yellow fringe flag at the U.S. Supreme Court, right? It's a different venue. And then they went into the writ of certiorari court, not the people's court. So the slave court is what you would go to. If you're going to the U.S. Supreme Court, chances are you're going to the slave court, right? Which means you're going to go in, you're going to write a writ of certiorari, they're going to accept it. You're going to go sit in front of the judges. Judges are going to be on a different tier than you.
They're going to be
the Article
three tiers up.
Yeah. The Article 3 Common Law Court, which was the original volition for sovereigns, is actually on the second floor, right? And that's the one that I control at the U.S. Supreme Court. And it has a lot of games in it played within it, too, because it's actually on the Masonic pavement, right? So when you go into the U.S. Supreme Court, they have their own Masonic lodge in there. It's a whole different theatrical function of what I call higgledy-piggledy, which is an illusion upon illusion of false concepts to control mankind, to persuade outcomes of cases. And so when you go to the U.S. Supreme Court, like, all the words are italicized on the wall. Well, why is that, Josh? All words that are italicized are misspelled in contract.
Interesting.
Right? So
absolutely they are.
Absolutely are. Yeah. You know why that is? Because you're changing the slant of font, which breaks the continuance of evidence. Right? Because the first rule of contract is you must maintain continuance of the evidence, and you must have knowledge. You must have comprehension of what's going on. Full closure. Right? Without the full closure, you have no capacity to enter into contract. And that's what the general public has been missing since 1999, is the full closure, saying, and they can't, for some reason, public can't figure it out, right? Oh, we got election fraud. No, you have no terms to set up an election. Not that you have election fraud. Yeah. You don't have a term to. There is no Federal Elections Commission. There's no flag for them to set up the terms for a contract. So it just blows my mind to watch the people over and over since 2000 do the same thing over and over again, and they're getting the same results. Now, I will say that, some presidents have got in there and have done the best that they could. But unfortunately, because of the fall behind networks and the choices that we have and that are put in front of our leaders, we don't have a pulse with the people. Right? The first rule of a senator should not be hanging out in Washington, D.C. He needs to be at the coffee shop in his venues, learning and getting the complaints and what the people's needs are.
I agree with that.
Then going back over there and saying, hey, my people need this. This is what my citizens who voted for me, this is what they need. These are things that are just not looked at anymore. Why? Because the lobbyists who have ruined that theater have come in and taken that. Why would a senator have to do that? Because the cut's over here. And they, again, back to this medium exchange, they put this value on this monetary system instead of what the people's needs are, what we need out here. And a senator or representative could go to any community that he was supposedly or she was voted in and go hang out. The problem is they can't anymore. Might get their ass kicked, right? So that's a whole different thing for them, right? Because the people haven't learned how to go set the terms for their leaders. So we have to go be back in and establish a new term, a new field, a new theater. And this is what I tender to the citizens of the world, is that we could do that through the Title IV flag, but we have to come together. We have to learn how to communicate in quantum grammar, because we want to keep it in the now space in your grammar, because if you don't, and you allow these attorneys to enter into subjective interpretation about past tense definitions and future tense connotations, then you create enough controversy to create war.
Now, what you're talking about there in the sense of now space, maybe this is important to touch on. You're talking, if I go into a courtroom in the modern day, I don't know anything about this. I'm ignorant of the law, as they would state. I go in there ignorant of the law. A lawyer can argue various definitions from various different time periods pertaining to the law. And the Supreme Court has upheld these variations throughout many years, and various other courts.
But, they put their subjective interpretation on what it means to them.
Exactly.
So what we want to do in the quantum grammar is we take out the capacity for someone else to put a value on what the citizen's needs are for subjective interpretation. So now the citizens now control the fact of their free hyphen energy, right? Or their cure, right? We want to move away from this concept of pharmaceuticals, because that death agenda has happened. And those that have sprung this are going to be held accountable, because, there may not be many of us left when it's all said and done, but we're going to be all together.
So
right?
The hyphen, the hyphen is like when I write a check, right?
Yeah.
So if I write a check for like $25, I do 20-5 hyphen 0 over 100, or 25 dash hyphen dollars 0 over 100. And that's to make sure that nothing can be implemented in between to misconstrue my meaning. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct. But if you were to take the hyphen out and you put 20 space 5 or 205, you see what happens here?
Yeah.
Well, if numbers are nouns and people are nouns, why are we not doing that with our names? And so that's why when I say my name, I put the hyphen between my first name and my middle name, Russell hyphen, and then I put a full colon, Gould at the end, to control my last name. And it's the same thing with time. If we look on our time here, on your clock, on your computer, you have a colon between your numbers. If you were to drop that colon out, you lose the volition.
You do.
Of what you're trying to articulate, which is the concept of time.
Now, does this derive a lot from Roman canon law in the sense of capitis aliquis maximus, capitis aliquis minimus, these types of aspects?
Yeah, capitis diminutium, minimus, maximus, and medium are very important on the social engineering and this runaway society that they've placed upon us, and through this debt system, credit and debt system, through the birth certificate system. So when you look at the concepts of capitis diminutium and how that implements into the birth certificate, is a very scary thing, what they've done.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah. And so we can look at various points in time when this happened, but the Act of 1871 was really the nail in the coffin for the free aspect of the United States of America. I think it started happening way before that. There was ties with Lincoln. I talk about the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, how these are really amendments of enslavement of humanity, allowing for the perpetuation of contract law. The easiest example of this I give to people is that the 13th Amendment neither slavery nor involuntary servitude should be a state of mankind. Well, this is interesting because the Declaration of Independence, which is one of our foundational legal documents, states that all men are created equal by the power of their creator. So all men are already created equal. We did not need a constitutional amendment to say this, but if we look at the verbiage or the wordage that was actually expressed in the 13th Amendment, it's not saying a person cannot be in a state of freedom or involuntary servitude. It's instead saying that a person is in a state of freedom and a person can be in a state of voluntary servitude, which is contractual law. And then the 14th Amendment comes up and it says all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. Person as defined by the Fourth Amendment is a fictitious entity, not the actual people, which is talking about a contract. So the 13th Amendment establishes that a human being can exist in the state of a contract. The 14th Amendment actually comes out there and makes the contract viable as a citizen of the United States. And this was the predicate for the Act of 1871.
They're set up the legal fiction through that.
That's it.
Right. And so they set up a straw man scenario to allow the corporation to control the man. And so, there's many facets, as you know, Josh, of sovereignty. Right? There's spirit of sovereignty. There's sovereigns that coin their own money. Right? There's different concepts of sovereignty. And sovereignty is really a humble and a very difficult thing because it's about self-governance and controlling from the inside out.
Right.
Right. And some of these things that we're having difficulties with is the bombardment of the pharmaceuticals, the bombardment of the 5G, all these things that they're using, the nanotech in the food, all of these things, the fluoride in the water, the mercury amalgams in our teeth. I mean, you name it. It's been a war theater against us from cradle to grave.
Yeah.
So we have to learn how to come together and combat these. The 5G thing is a real difficult thing because it's programming our cellular memory, right? It's programming our cells. Well, I'm a chemist, and so what I do to solve that is I take ammonium chloride baths. And if you hit yourself with a Geiger counter after you've been around the 5G, you'll go off like a fire engine. I mean, you're gonna
like a fly on shit or something, right?
Yeah, but take an ammonium chloride bath and then and soak in it for 15 minutes and rinse that ammonium chloride off. And now you've restructured your cellular tissues to take off the radiation out of your cells.
Interesting.
Right. So these are, but this is not taught. I know this because I'm in chemistry and on the metallurgy side. So I look at the chemicals and make chemicals to improve the quality of mankind's life, right? This is what real science is, not to be used to, it's always to question, right? Because we're always questioning science, and it's okay to question science. It's a wonderful thing. But we also want to look at our science and use that science to help our fellow mankind. And it's very difficult because as a corporate entity on the straw man, they've bombarded through foreign enterprises our patent offices in our former United States and worldwide by the Chinese government, who is Chinese citizens who are ruthless, who know no private property, who know no boundaries of theft, and they are stealing our concepts. So I shut down the patent office in 1999, which was nice. And so now I have my own patent position in quantum grammar. I've got a guy that runs that. So that's a whole nother theater. But the ability to get the concept out in a market wholesale, and I don't like to call it retail, but sellable position for our mankind, that's where the fight is. That's where the red tape is. That's where they like to use the fumbling, bumbling idiots, the clowns in action, to make sure that none of that stuff gets to our general public to help. And then they give us this crappy technology of electric cars, which is, by the way, archaic technology, right? So they give us all
1900s technology.
Yeah, but the way they went about it, they know that they could go to a monoatomic cell, right? They know what they can do, but they've made the choices not to use it for themselves, of course, but not to give it to the general public. Instead, when it gets cold outside, the electric cars can't be charged, and people are getting stranded. Cars are starting on fire. They give us trash, right? And so the metals cartels know exactly what they're doing. They've done away with our ability to generate superconductivity metals. And when we do come across it, we have to fight off the fumbling, bumbling idiots who are in the way of everything in every theater in all the labs, basically all the labs. Maybe there's a few good ones out there that have old school ICP in different ways, but on the superconductivity and monoatomic elements, there's actually no testing material. Testing element, but what you have to do is be able to use it and put the temperature on it to become ambient temperature superconductors, right? So we can change out all of our lights. They're giving us crazy LED lights now to screw with the lines. I mean, they've done a lot to thwart the creativity because there's great scientists around the world.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute. Do you delve into the monatomic element side with monatomic gold, monatomic silver, the true mana of ancient Egypt in the Hebrews and this type of stuff?
I do. It's one of my favorite things to do, right? And I have right now. I'm not working currently, but when I do work in those theaters, I was trained up by the guys that were behind David Hudson. So I don't know if you know who David Hudson is, but John Sickfus and all. Yeah, those guys. They trusted me with their technology because they saw the grammar as a way to implementing it into society. And so, because they knew Hudson's patents were they're worthless toilet paper because I can syntax them. Once I could prove the syntaxing on sentence structure, scientists began to open up to me to how to use their technology and actually put it into the use of the people. And so that's a theater. And I told them, I said, you kind of have to wait for that because there's too many bad guys running around right now. Right. And so we have to clean up the bad guys, and then that tech can be implemented from the people to the people.
So
right?
what kind of benefits do we get though? So I've actually had, I think it was David Hutchins' monatomic gold back in the day. This was early
Yeah.
2000s. But I ordered some. It was a really expensive vial. It was like $250 when I got one of these vials. And when I took this stuff, I took like 10 drops under the tongue, and I had one of the most profound weeks of dreams I've ever had before in my life. They were vivid, they were lucid, they were intricate, detailed, like spiritual. It was some of the most fascinating dreams, but it also compensated in my real life, in my physical life, because the next days I felt really sluggish and really bad.
Yeah, yeah, that is what happened. That's exactly what happened to you. And so what happened was your synapses and your pineal gland opened up, and it drained you because it didn't teach you how to cut off your kundalini energy going from underneath out. Right. So there's breathing techniques that we're not because David Hudson just doesn't know.
Right.
That's the facts, right? He doesn't know about the arcade how our cell system works. He's just passing it out. Right. So there's different techniques that if you go back and reestablish that, look
already there now.
Yeah. Look at cutting off your energy so that you're not a total conduit and block it from one side.
Interesting.
And that may give shouldn't be as sluggish in the mornings.
Interesting. I haven't done it in a long time. I learned I've done a lot of regular psychotropic drugs throughout my life, throughout my teenage years. And that's kind of evolved into me getting involved in the occult and esoteric mysteries in my teenage years, expanding on that.
Exactly.
Been 2.5 decades into that now and study research, investigation, those types of things, where the people who understand this is that's where a lot of what we're talking about now actually derived from, was these various secret societies, the hidden knowledge that they have kept from either various different ancient cultures, mythical cultures, whatever, and derived a lot of this knowledge that is hidden from us, secret, occulted from us, to what we see today.
If you ever studied some of Nicholas Flamel's work, you will definitely see where he was coming from as far as the chemistry side, the ayahuasca journey. I mean, there's some really profound stuff. The plant medicine is very healing, right? And we're just not given. They've taken that all away and exchanged it with pharmaceuticals, and the pharmaceutical companies looking forward to all the shareholders and their families dying off. I'm really looking forward to all of that happen and all the people that are forcing this upon us. Looking forward to all their deaths and all their funerals. Seeing that in my mind. I hope your audience is seeing it too. They're not going to beat us on this death cult. They're not going to beat our fellow mankind. We love each other. We're not going to be divided. We're going to come together and learn how to communicate in a way that we can capture these guys in the now space to put their thinking on trial. And that's the value of the quantum grammar language, is that you can pinpoint their performances to create these concepts that put this death concept on society, to now get into the condition of mind on why they chose to do that. As they confess by their performances, and they have no answers because there's no answer to sheer meanness. Now we can really address the spirit that's within them. And so now we can bring in the military and the Faraday cages, and we don't let that spirit escape as we neutralize them, right? And that's a whole different style of death. And that way their energy can't be passed on. And if you look at some of Stephen Greer's work on soul capturing and some of the things that the top end is doing right now, we want to make sure that we close that off so that spirit does not get back out.
Interesting. That's a completely different topic of conversation.
Yeah, when we kill these people,
soul capture.
When we catch all these guys, bring me to the table, and we'll make sure that the science is there in place, that energy does not escape, right? Because we don't want that coming back into society.
Yeah, no, this is actually interesting because I want to pull something up real quick. Because I don't know if you're familiar with Nostradamus, Nostradamus's latest prophecies that deal with the year 2023. I'm going to read one to you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I want to read one to you, and this one they believe deals with the year 2023. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And I got to find it real quick. It should be right here. There it is. 7 months of great war. People die of evil, but their light will not fall into the hands of the king. Think about what you
Hey,
just said there.
hey, it's the only way to. I've had a lot of time to think about what I'm going to do when I get in front of some of these jokers, and we want to make sure that the society sees this, right? We hear a lot of things out here, Josh, about the dumbs and things blown up. Society needs to see evil losing. Because it'll change the psychological morale of who we are as a people going, yes, we got them, right?
Yeah.
We need to see that. So if there are good people out there doing these things that people are saying, which I have no way to verify, right?
Yeah,
I
just
don't.
I'm very speculative on a lot of stuff, trust me.
I am too, right? Especially with the cloning and all the things that see that they're capable of. If these things are happening, we need to tell those whoever's doing this, hey, let's let mankind see this.
Right.
I mean, how difficult could it be really to put a bullet in some of these guys? Really? I mean, think about it. It ain't that difficult, right? So, it was just a matter of getting to the right theater, getting to the right spot, but also make sure that we capture that energy. And it's very important that we do that, right? And there's things that the military has, especially you being a Navy guy, being at Navy labs, that the isotoping capture and all that, they got it down to a science if they want to.
I can actually tell people a lot about this. We actually discussed this. There's an article I'm writing right now on the multi-domain battlefield in the sense of how the current war that is waging on this planet is basically going through these various subdomains of society. So you have your social, you have your cultural, you have your institutional, you have your academic, you have your political, then you have supply chain, resources, this type of stuff, and then you have greater aspects of geopolitical. And each one of these domains are being infiltrated and controlled to various degrees by these globalist actors. But surrounding this is a primary domain of information. And this information domain actually started the transition in 2012, 13, 14, and 15 towards this modern consumption of information. So we moved away from the 30-minute and the 1-hour news broadcast of Walter Cronkite, and we moved towards 1 to 2 minute videos on YouTube or 30-minute blasts on social media or memes to consume information. It was during this time that I believe people who were very freedom-loving, patriotic, went out there and began transitioning people to take over the idea of information, to become the media. So we are now the media. And this is actually what we've seen since 2016, the modern day, is we've hijacked this whole idea and conceptualization of information, and we now control it back into our hands. And this is the first step in acquiring all these other functions of these domains and begin removing the infiltration.
I totally concur with that. What I want to see, though, on those domains is I want to see the visualization to give the good people of the lands of the world the concept that help has happened, and now you can see it with your own eyes. And this has to happen, and it needs to happen soon because they're coming with more scare waves. We have not seen the end of the causality of these jabs. Right. This is a very and the people that have done this, they're running now because, they're probably cloning themselves like crazy, I'm sure. Right. Because we'll get them all. There's more good people. I totally believe in my heart that there's more good people in the world than there is bad. It's just a matter of full closure and having the right information. Once you have the right information and you can take the financial yoke upon these different theaters that have been held down in these third world countries, because America's going third world, right? It's the direction it's going, right? And so it's unfortunate, but we should, as accountable scientists, we should build a system and a platform so strong that it reaches those places that people were held down, and you build the infrastructure back up there to give them incentive to go back. Give them something to live for. Let them be in their own cultural function, right? Because that's the one that they thrive. That's the one that they fight over so feverishly to be about. So don't come into another GeoTerra location and feverishly fight on something that was acceptable over here, because that's not fair to our fellow mankind, because it was doing fine in their ideologies over here.
Right. Well, this is interesting that you're saying this, because we have to be careful on our nounage and our verbiage because we are on YouTube. But let's take this one cultural infiltration that's actually happening right now. They're coming from their own domain substructure of ideology, and they're amassing this and distributing it through the mainstream, through mainstream entertainment, through politicians to the rest of the world, as if it is a social norm, and basically forcing and coercing society to follow it, to conform to it. And it's exactly what you're talking about right there. Is they can have their own little substrates of culture. That's fine. That's how humanity has actually evolved and basically been all right with so far. But when you start to take that small little ideology and expand it out, when it's only accepted by a small minor few, and you start to force it upon other people, that's when we start getting into tyrannical and oppressive means. This is where the idea of tyrants comes about, or feudalistic societies, authoritarian governments, 1984, George Orwell, and so forth.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And, it desensitizes us, because you can't unlearn people once they see it. Mm-hmm. And so now they've blurred, and they've done away with the capacity to put a line in the sand and say no. Because the second you say no, then you're bombarded by all the social, like you said, the domains that now attack that position that said no, because you took a foundational position, because you felt that ideology or that domain trespassed upon the freedom of choice of what your moral value from within tells you who you are. And so it's very, very difficult to undo and unlearn as we see this nonsensical tirade come upon we the people. But we're smart as a society. We're good and we're caring, and we're going to fix this. And the way we do that is to go back to the root of the problem, which is not so much the theater of the election, but now we set up a new style of voting outside the parameters of the tech companies, outside the parameters of because you guys have the Postmaster General on your side, the mail that they're using, we can ship that a different direction. It doesn't have to come into our now space, right? Mm-hmm. So all of that can be set up in a way that the people's needs are, right? Right. So that's really what it's about. Is we already know what the problems are. The problems are is people are trying to kill us, and we don't like it, and we don't like it, right? I don't like it. I don't like people that I have cared about being vaccinated. I have very dear friends that are vaccinated. You think I'm real happy about this, right? And their family members are all of a sudden breaking down with massive cancer, and they're dead. People are dropping like flies all over the place. You think I'm real happy about this? No.
Well, I don't think anybody is. And so
it's not a laughing matter.
It's not.
These people that have done this, shame. But like I said, there's definite ways to kill that off. We just, as science and scientists, we need to be smart about this as we terminate, right?
Right.
So
tell me about kind of